Professor Wiseguy here with another book report. Recently, I've been reading some of the works of Jules Verne. Now, I'd never read Jules Verne. I'd heard of him. I always think of the very end of the last Back to the Future movie, where we find out that Doc Brown, after not getting Back to the Future with his beloved, has not only married, but had two sons who are, like preteens by this point, and their names are Jules and Verne, in honor of Jules Verne. You didn't need to know that, but that was free. All right, but Jules Verne is mostly known as the author of several very popular adventure novels. I want to look at one of them right now, but let's talk about Jules Verne, the author, for just a moment, very briefly. He was French. He lived from 1828 to 1905. Now, he published the book for today, Journey to the Center of the Earth, in 1864, and then produced an enlarged version of it in 1867. Let's look for a moment at the basics of this story, and I'm not going to do a big spoiler here, but I will say that the main characters don't die in the story. It's an adventure story, there's danger, but they don't die. And I mention that because you don't have to get very far into it to realize that the narrator is one of those main characters. If he's narrating, he probably didn't die, right? So they don't die. The main characters are Professor Otto Liedenbrock. The professor, as you might guess from his name, is a professor, a scientist, and he's also a German. All right, he is accompanied by his nephew Axel, and the two of them discover a document, an old document, medieval even, or at least Renaissance, by someone by the name of Arne Saknussemm. Arne Saknussemm had apparently journeyed to the center of the earth. Be a great name for a book, wouldn't it? All right, so they decide to follow Arne Saknussemm in his path and go to the center of the earth themselves. And I say they decided because the professor, the older of the two, he's the one who really wants to go. And Axel is basically thinking, you're crazy. We're going to die if we do this. I don't want to do this. But for some reason, he feels the necessity of going. He leaves the girl he loves behind and goes with the professor on a journey to the center of the earth. The two of them, when they get to Iceland, which is the place where apparently you go in to journey to the center of the earth, they meet their guide, Hans. And Hans is basically a big Nordic pack animal. Hans, he should have been smarter than he was. He never says no. He doesn't ask what the job is exactly. He just proceeds to do the job, only stipulating that he get paid every week. Okay, and he basically is risking his life constantly and really foolishly, and he just goes along because, he got paid every week. All right, these three, they go through a number of adventures. They almost die. Nobody seems to complain except Axel, the narrator, who is constantly complaining. And honestly, he's the only sensible one of the bunch. Had they had any sense, they would have gone back. They would have been better equipped. And no, they don't. They just proceed to the center of the earth. Now, here's what I find really interesting about this story. There are no antagonists in this story. The only adversaries, the only conflicts we see in this novel are the conflicts between the human and nature. That is, you're going into a very hostile and unknown situation. Are you going to have water? Are you going to have food? That's a good question. And the answer is no in a lot of cases. So there's that danger, but there's also the conflict between the human and themselves. Basically, Is Axel going to wimp out, or is he going to stick to this thing and be a great adventurer? And of course, he's the narrator. We already know that he's going to survive. All right, I mention this because I find it remarkable. Jules Verne did not see the need to have big conflicts, didn't have to have an adversary, an enemy. There are actually some prehistoric creatures that the adventurers encounter, but they don't have to tussle with them, you know? It's just they see them, and they may or may not have seen a 12-foot tall prehistoric man, but we're not entirely sure. Certainly there's no conflict between them. And yet, this novel has been very, very successful over the years, sold well, has stayed in print, and has been adapted multiple times, I guess because it's just kind of a fascinating story. We can go to 1959 when Hollywood takes up this story. And there, James Mason, 50 years of age, portrays Sir Oliver Lindenbrook. You see, we just fought this whole war against the Germans. It wouldn't do to have a hero who's German, right? The Brits, though, we're kind of okay with the Brits, so we'll stick with them. Instead of Axel, we have Alec McEwen, who is played by Pat Boone, who seems to take every opportunity to take his shirt off and be the eye candy for this film. They add the professor's niece, Jenny Lindenbrock. She would be Liedenbrock in the novel, but Lindenbrock because it's, I guess, less German. And she goes along for not clear reasons, but you know what? This will shock you, but she and Pat Boone end up kind of having a little spark, and you know, we needed that. We needed the romance. We have these characters, and we still have Hans, because I guess, you know, you can't have Germans, but an Icelander, that's okay. And then, of course, we added Hans's pet duck. A duck. Yes. I want to picture this. In 1958, let's say, there was a script meeting in Hollywood, and people at the studio were saying, well, whatever shall we do to really make this movie sizzle and be successful? And it was successful. And somebody said, you know what we need? We need a duck. Yeah, Hans will have a pet duck. We'll name her Gertrude. And she'll come along on the adventure. Wow, that's great. But they also added an antagonist. And this antagonist was the evil Count Saknussemm. Now, you might remember that name, Saknussemm, Arne Saknussemm. This was the original explorer that gave them the tip that allowed them to go to the center of the earth. But this guy, Count Saknussemm, is the last survivor of Arne Saknussemm's family. And so the Count is pursuing Professor Lindenbrock's crew because, you know, you just don't let people tramp on your turf, right? For some unknown reason, he kills his servant. He is then tried for murder. Nobody's willing to execute him, even though they found him guilty, so they haul him along because, you know, it's what you do when you're traveling to the center of the earth. Eventually, Count Saknussemm, this is so sad, he kills Gertrude. No more duck. And Gertrude gone. Hans wants to kill him, but he's restrained because, you know, superior Anglo-American morality and restraint and all that stuff. So, we have a lot of things added to this story. A lot of things are kind of the same. Oh, one other thing they add is like giant lizards, which are really poorly done. I mean, I guess 1959, how good could your special effects be? But they're kind of goofy. And just to show that they really knew how to add stuff that was important, when the whole crew escapes from a volcano, as one does, at the end of the movie. They're all together except Pat Boone, who somehow manages to end up naked in a tree in a convent. Wow. Great stuff. Now, I point all this out. I'm sorry. I've also got to mention that the thing that got me reading this story, but also thinking about Jules Verne in general, was a memory that I had of an old Saturday morning cartoon show from when I was a kid. And I'm going to date myself. This came out in 1967. It was called Journey to the Center of the Earth. Well, they cut it up into 20-minute segments, and you can watch the whole thing on YouTube. I say that. You can't watch the whole thing because it is so terrible that you won't be able to get through it. I thought, I don't want to see one of those. And so I put one on, and I was like watching and just thinking, this is awful. This is incredibly awful. And I thought, well, it's got to be over. And I looked, and it was 10 minutes in. It was awful. But don't worry, Gertrude the Duck is still in the animated version. Okay. Here's what I'm left thinking. Why is it that Jules Verne can have extreme success with a book that has no evil Count Saknussemm, that does not have to have giant lizards that really attack? They're there, but they're not attacking anybody. That just has the peril of exploration and taking risk. Didn't have to have a present romantic interest, didn't have to have any of that stuff, and yet that has been a constantly in print, oftentimes translated work of fiction, where the films are largely forgotten. I don't know. It might say something about the difference between watching film and reading a novel. That could be the explanation. It could be something to say, it could have something to say with the difference between audiences 150 years ago and 50 years ago. It could have something to say with the laziness and the lack of originality in Hollywood scriptwriters. I don't know. But they made a lot of money on the movies, so I really can't blame them for doing what they did. I mean, hey, somebody was saying, that duck was what put us over the top. That was my idea. Maybe not. I don't know. I find Jules Verne kind of a fascinating writer. I find him somebody worth reading. It's not a hard or long read. So check him out yourself. See what you think. Is it going to change your outlook on humanity? Probably not, but it's an enjoyable thing. So enjoy it. Got it? All right. For now, though, get out of here.